Welcome to the Thriving Children podcast, the show that helps parents and teachers to put the magic back in child development. Here's your host, Clare Crew.
This is episode 119 of the Thriving Children podcast, and I'm Clare Crew. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Gill Connell from Moving Smart. So as someone who's been learning a lot from you over the last few years, Gill, I am delighted to be having this conversation with you. A big warm welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Claire. It's great that our paths have crossed. I think we've got a lot in common.
Yeah. We certainly do. So, Gill, you specialise hugely in the connection between movement and development. Could you start by sharing a little bit about your journey to this point and how Moving Smart came to be?
Yeah, well, I've been in education for more years than I actually care to talk about, really, but passionate about learning. And so I've been a classroom teacher, specialising a lot in early new entrant, early school years, and also in early childhood. And it was always a frustration as a teacher for me that I would have children who would come into my classroom. They couldn't sit still, they couldn't hold pencils, many of them, not all of them. They couldn't follow instructions. They didn't have what I would call the physical foundations required for succeeding in the classroom. Many people talk to me about or ask me questions about what do kids need to be ready for school. And I don't talk about ABCs and 1, 2, 3s because I believe that children need so much in terms of the foundations. For instance, if I want a child to hold a pencil and write a story, I'm taking a lot for granted when I ask them to hold a pencil and write down their ideas. There are so many preparations that are required for pencil grip, and people think if I just put a little gripper on my kid's pencil, or I practice threading, everything's going to be okay. But really, pencil grip starts when you're a baby and you start grasping for things, and even before that, when your reflexes start to emerge. There's a reflex called the palmar reflex, which is associated with grip. And it goes right back to those very early sensory experiences that help children integrate reflexes, playing in sensory play, hanging and swinging, taking their own weight, climbing trees, swinging on monkey bars. All of those things develop upper body strength, develop gross motor skills, which in turn help fine motor skills to develop, which in turn help a child to be able to manage and manipulate a pencil. And I always talk about the fact that, once a child's automated something like that pencil grip, then their brain is free to think about what they're writing about. So, it changed the whole way I was teaching and thinking about children. Kids use play is a form of developing all of these physical foundations. And that's really what gets me out of the bed in the morning, Claire, and still does.
And isn't it crazy that we're really denying a lot of children those experiences early in life, and yet we're still expecting them to perform well with things like the handwriting? It just doesn't add up once you have that understanding of the origins of those more top layer skills.
Absolutely. We're living in a society where we're paranoid about kids falling off things, and, we're averse to risk. And not that I like the word risk. I like to think about kids in terms of becoming courageous learners. But we're becoming a little bit more unrealistic about what kids' needs are. And maybe we're losing the understanding that play connects learning, and that it is learning right from the very beginning, and it's a child's journey, and that's what we need to respect, and we need to provide environments that are conducive to children developing these very important physical foundations. And, if you're worried about height, it doesn't necessarily need to be a monkey bar. Children can wall walk. They can put their hands on the floor and walk their feet up the wall. They can grip things. They can do all sorts of different, grasping activities and pushing and pulling things around the playground that are also going to help their upper body strength to develop. It's about stamina. It's about muscle strength. Another example, for instance, is, when kids do pick up pencils, they quite often make holes in the paper. They push too hard. Mm-hmm. And that tells us that children have an enough experience of learning how much force I need to use. How much force do I need to push that truck in my playground? Because that's going to have a direct connection to how much force I use when I write on the paper. I just want to make people understand that kids do everything for a reason. They don't understand that it's learning, but it is, for them it's just fun. But for us in education, if we can make those connections and we can see where these skills originate, then we can give children the space and provide the environments that will help children to develop these very important skills.
So true and so necessary. And I think particularly with educator hats on, when a lot of children aren't having, the opportunities to do that at home. There's more indoor time, there might be smaller backyards, there's more screen time, and less opportunities to engage in those kind of, big body movements.
Yep. And let me pick up on your just passing comment on screen time. As an educator, I am asked, one of my briefs is I have to help children learn to read. And the same goes for the muscles that drive the eyes. If kids are staring at screens a lot, they're not developing eye fitness. They're not developing acuity. They're not developing their ability to focus and change focus automatically. And what we're noticing is when kids come into the classroom, many of them are sitting, rubbing their eyes, having difficulty tracking. They lose their place. They get watery eyes. They look away a lot because they can't focus because their eyes just haven't had the practice that they need. That play, and in particular being outside, provides children. It's that automated, I see far away and then I can automatically see up close. When you're on a screen, it's the same distance all the time. So we just forget about how important it is for our kids to be developing these things naturally.
You've talked a couple of times about how important it is for children to be able to do things automatically. I'm losing my voice today. It's not a great day to be podcasting. But maybe you could explain a little bit about the process of automaticity and why it's such an important component in early childhood development.
Sure. The human brain, yours included, can only do one thinking task at a time. And I often give this example. If you think about when you first learned to drive a car, you take yourself back to that time. You were totally focused on driving and you shut everything else out and just focused on the driving. And that's what we call the cognitive stage of learning. And then what you do is you practice it. And when you practice something and do something over and over and over again, you build muscle memory and you build the ability for the muscles to be able to automate the physical task without your brain actually having to be engaged. And at some point, and I can't tell you how much practice that will be because for everybody it's different, but at some point you will have automated that task. So getting to the point where you no longer have to think about something starts off with a cognitive stage where you're totally engrossed in the learning, and that when you're working with little people or you're engaging with little people, quite often little people are engrossed in their play and you can be talking to them and they don't answer you. So that tells you that is at the cognitive stage. And then they just do things over and over and over and over again. And some of it's just because of the sheer pleasure of it. But what they're also doing is developing muscle strength, muscle memory. and also strong, very, very strong connections in the brain, so that when they come back to do it another time, they'll be able to do it without thinking about it. Now, let's go back to the writing example that I gave you. If I said to you, let's write a story on a piece of paper, but I want you to put the pen in the hand you don't normally write with. What goes on in your head when I say that to you, Claire? What will you be?
Yeah. I'll be very much focused on the actual motor mechanics of what I'm doing. There won't be much attention going to what I'm actually writing about.
Exactly, because you haven't automated writing with your non-dominant hand. And so, because the human brain can only do one thinking task at a time, and you think about children writing and they haven't automated how to hold a pencil or how much force to use or where does print start in the English language, it starts from left to right. All of those things need to be automated before your brain is then free to think about what you're going to write about. So going back to that example, when you are writing with your non-dominant hand, you're thinking about the process. You're not thinking about the content. And consequently, your writing will be shorter, it'll be bigger, the slope will be all over the place. And what's most important is you will have a very simple idea. And so what I'm talking to you about is you haven't automated the physical foundation, which is how to hold that pencil. And so you're thinking about that and not about what you're writing about. If we put it into I'll tell you another story. I was watching some children in a classroom and they were doing some patterning. And the teacher had a whole lot of coloured beads on the floor. And she said to the children, let's make a pattern with the beads on the floor. Red, blue, green, red, blue, green. So all the children started doing the pattern on the floor and they did a really great job. So she then gave them a piece of string and she said to them, now I want you to put the same pattern on the piece of string, red, blue, green, red, blue, green. So the children started doing this activity. And I was watching one little boy who was struggling getting the string through the hole in the bead. And he licked the string and he changed hands and he was getting really frustrated. And finally he got the red one on the piece of string. And then he picked up another coloured bead and the same thing happened. Now, the teacher was moving around the children, and when she got to this little guy, she said, I said red, blue, green, weren't you listening? And then she turned to me and she said, John can't pattern. She didn't say it like that, but that was what she implied.
Yeah.
John can't pattern. And I said, no, John can't thread, because John could pattern on the floor. But when she gave John the piece of string, his thinking task changed from the patterning to the threading. And the reason that happens is that the human brain grows from the bottom up, and the lower levels of brain development are all about physical development, sensory development, and developing my motor skills. So the brain reverts back to the things it doesn't know. So when he couldn't thread, that became his focus. And you see what happens is you can make the wrong assumption about a child's knowledge base and their understanding simply because the physical motor task has not been automated. So the human brain can only do one thinking task at a time. You can put a thinking task on top of an automated task. So if I've automated my threading, I can then pattern. But you can't put two thinking tasks together. And you've got no idea how many times light bulbs go off in teachers' and parents' heads about their kids, when I say stuff like this to them. And you know what? Nature is such an amazing thing. Nature has it all programmed out for the kids. You know, all of these things will happen if we allow children the space to play and the environment to develop these things. But we're changing the whole way our children are living. We're driving them everywhere instead of them walking and jumping over the cracks in the footpath on the way to school, jumping in the puddles. We're sitting them in front of screens. We're getting them into academics way too early. We're paranoid about their safety. We don't like them getting dirty because, you know, they might catch a bug. There's so many things that we're changing for children now that nature and evolution has programmed into children that, you know, they don't have the opportunity to change, to do. So, you know, as parents and teachers, it's critical that we understand what children need and provide those kind of environments for them to develop this.
Absolutely. But you've got to have an awareness of it first, haven't you, before you can then start to get those light bulb moments, as you said. And clearly in a class of, 26 or so children, they're all going to have different skills and ideas that are automated and other ones that are thinking tasks. So there's a real magic to sort of seeing where children are at and then providing an environment that creates the freedom for that movement and for that flexibility to meet them where they're at.
I think one of the things that really motivates me with Moving Smart is that Moving Smart is a here's why, here's how kind of program. In other words, if you understand why children need these kinds of experiences, then I'll do it, and here's some ideas. Let me give you another example of what I'm saying. I have lots of teachers who complain to me, and parents, by the way, that their kids can't sit still. And one of the things that really does, I go wow every time I talk about it, and that is, when kids can't sit still, it's not because they're being naughty. It's because their balance system or their vestibular system is not yet fully developed. The most advanced form of balance is to be still. And you can't teach a child to sit still by practicing sitting still. You have to allow the children to engage in the physical movement patterns that underpin it. And do you know what those are? Rolling, spinning, slowly preferably, and being upside down. So I talk to parents and, teachers, and I say to them, so if you've got a child who's a bit of a wiggly child and it's mat time and you're doing some learning on the mat, where do you put that child? And they always say, I put them right beside me. And then I'll say to them, if the child had a choice, where does the child put himself? So the child puts himself down the back or to the side of the mat. Why? So that child can move freely, so that child can spin, so that child can wriggle. And what that does is that triggers your balance system, which helps the child to concentrate. It is such an oxymoron. In other words, we think those kinds of movements that we see with children are children giving us a message that they're not concentrating or they're not on task. But actually, they're triggering what we call the reticular activating system in their brain, which is specifically there to help you to refocus. It's a part of the brain that helps you wake up your cortex and wake up your thinking brain. And the more spinning activities and rolling activities and being upside down children can do on a daily basis, the better their concentration. Parents will often say to me, oh, my child swings on his chair when he's at the dinner table, or he lies upside down on the couch to watch TV. And all I will say back to them is, well, that's because he hasn't had enough of it in his daily physical diet. He's telling you, you kept me still all of this time, and I actually need a certain amount of it, and I can't tell you how much because some kids need a little bit and some kids need a whole lot. But I haven't had enough. So I'll do it when is probably an opportune time when you don't want me to do it. I was at a aquarium on a Sunday with my grandkids a while ago, and we were lining up to buy the tickets. And to line up, it's kind of like a zigzag thing, and you move along, and there's bars and things. So it took a long time to get the tickets. And what were the children doing? They were going round and round on the bars. They were hanging upside down on the bars. They were just making the most of that kind of environment and, doing what kids do. And all the parents were growling at their kids, telling them to stand still. And I'm saying to my kids, you go ahead because, this is what you need. And if your body's telling you you need this, then that's what you do. As long as they're safe, I don't have a problem with it. And we just have to change the way we think about things. We have good balance as adults, but what did you do when you were a kid? You went round and round and round on the monkey bars. You rolled down hills. You did handstands and cartwheels and all of the things that help kids develop these things naturally.
Yeah.
Not all kids do that anymore.
No. And children innately, as you said before, children innately know what they need. And so just noticing what they're often doing, particularly from that movement point of view, gives us clues of what they're needing more of, what they're really craving.
That's right. Yeah. And you can provide such fun activities. Like I do an activity with kids sometimes when I'm reading them stories. This is with 3 and 4-year-olds who just adore this. I call it rollover reading. So instead of when I'm reading a story, having the children sit and watch the pictures, they'll lie down on the mat and we'll decide which way we're going to roll first. And every time I turn the page, they roll over. I read some more, and then I turn the page and they roll back again. So instead of sitting there and wriggling, I'm providing them with an environment to be able to do that. Or sometimes, I'll talk to parents about bath time is a perfect time to make a sausage roll. And they look at me as if I'm, a bit crazy. And I say, well, that towel is the pastry and the child is the sausage meat. Let's make a sausage roll or whatever you want to call it. But children will adore you for doing things like that. And that's because it's in their DNA. They are wired to do these things. They go head first down the slide at the park, and we worry about them doing things like that. Little kids will just bend over and look between their legs because they like to see what the world looks like upside down. That's balance. They'll sit on things and spin for hours. If you've got an office chair at home, lie your child across the office chair on his tummy and very slowly, about 1 revolution per 8 seconds, or lie them across your knee and just spin slowly. It'll be very good for you too. And I could talk about the science of that, but you can read about that in my book. But it's so fascinating, and as adults, we stop doing things like spinning. And I watch ballroom dancing sometimes and I think, how do those people spin like that? But they have very mature vestibular systems that allow themselves to do that because they have had lots of practice at doing it. So, it can affect us at any age. It's fascinating.
I love that rollover reading. That is such a golden idea, Gill. I think I'm definitely going to be using that one.
Cool.
But you're right. It's meeting the children where they're at as opposed to expecting things that really aren't developmentally appropriate.
Yeah. Yep. We want to make learning fun. We don't want to turn kids off learning.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I talk a lot to teachers and parents about is you've got to start thinking like a child. We try and teach children as if we are doing the learning. But kids learn totally differently. They learn through the right brain, and predominantly through the right brain. The right brain is the part of the brain that's associated with play, with doing, through real experience. The left part of the brain is more of the analytical side of the brain that makes sense of your learning. But the majority of young children are right brain learners, and they learn through doing. Prime example of that was I was working with some little 3-year-olds, and we were cutting up the apples together for morning tea for the kids at the preschool. And I just happened to say to them, let's see if we can, how many pips we could find in our apples. And we counted the pips and did, some very off-the-cuff math. And then I said, just out of the blue, I said, I wonder what an apple sounds like. And, what would you say if I said to you, what does an apple sound like?
Well, through the conventional kind of approach, it's that whole "at" for apple, isn't it?
Yep, you would either,
I would be thinking like crunching,
exactly.
like I think of the actual, how it actually sounds to engage with that.
Right. How have you learned that?
The A is for apple, or
the crunch thing. Yeah.
It's from eating them. It's from having many experiences over and over again with that item.
Okay. So do you know what the children did? They picked up the apples. All of them did it without fail. They picked up the apples, put it beside their ear, and they shook the apple. Now, that's the difference between an adult response, because an adult response is a learned response, but the child's response is, I need to do it to find out. I use my right brain. And I think if we can learn from that example, in that children, there is no right or wrong answer to that question. It is about your experience, and it is about your experience through the right brain that allows you to come up with your answer. And that's the difference between learning through play and rote learning. Your answer was really a rote answer. It was an expected answer. It's probably quite right, but actually apples have a whole lot of other sounds as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And when you think about the classroom, I mean, you were saying the classroom environment is almost wired for, how we learn as adults, but I actually think it's even not really conducive to learning as adults. Like, I struggle to be at a workshop just sitting, doing lots of academic absorption of information. And that's what the learning day is like for a lot of children, bar recess and lunch. I don't think it's even something that a lot of us as educators would engage with well on the receiving end.
No, I agree with you. And that's why I turned my classroom into a developmentally based classroom. And we were still doing literacy and numeracy, but we were doing it through the body and through play and through real experience. And it was just, we know that children under 7, that's the best way to learn. So why do we think they have to be anything else? We know it's a long time, and when you study and you go to school and you go to university, for some people, it's not how little people learn. It's just, there's so much we can learn through having fun, real experiences. And I'm sure the people listening will tell you that they learn best when they actually do the learning.
Absolutely. Even when that means making mistakes sometimes, that's a huge part of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right. It's all part of the journey, really, isn't it?
Now, we have got so much more to talk about, but the good thing is, Gill, is that I made contact with you back when I used to have a monthly theme for the podcast, and I invited you to co-host 4 episodes with me. So we're really coming to an end of this episode of the podcast, but it's not the last that you're going to be hearing from Gill, because we've got so much more to dive into. In the meantime, though, Gill, could you please share with everyone the names of your books and where we can find them and you online?
Sure. The best place to go is to our website, movingsmart.co.nz, at movingsmart.co.nz. Our books are available. A Moving Child is a Learning Child is the Here's Why book that I wrote with my colleague Cheryl McCarthy. And there is another book called Move, Play and Learn with Smart Steps. Both are published by Free Spirit Publishing in the United States. But you can get it on my website, you can get it on Amazon, you can get it on Fishpond, you can get it on most places. And then there is another one that I wrote with a wonderful Australian woman called Robin Crow, which is called Moving to Learn. And it's specifically for 0 to 3-year-olds and specifically for parents and people working with under 3s. And it's a very practical book, as opposed to Moving Child is all about movement and how that impacts on the developing child. And Smart Steps, Move, Play and Learn with Smart Steps, is here's 900 activities that are specifically progressive in the way they're set out. So they start off easy, and if you can do that, you do the next one, and they're all based on the kinetic scale, which we haven't had a chance to chat about, and I'm sure we're going to.
No, we will on the next episode. Absolutely. Yeah. You had too many beautiful stories to share.
Well, I think that's the best way to learn, isn't it? Through
it really is.
Experiences. Yeah.
And those books, to be honest, I didn't know about the one you had for the 0 to 3, so I'll be checking that out because that would be really helpful for the age group that I'm working with right now. But the other 2 books, they're like a glossy magazine. They are just so visually appealing and, as you said, so rich of information and activities, but they're a really inviting read. So it's not dry. It's just very captivating.
I'm not an academic. I'm a teacher, and I really wanted that kind of a voice that was easy to read. It's the kind of books that you can sit down, open up a page, and you can read and learn stuff. But it's practical, and I tell lots of stories, and they're all backed up with ideas, simple ideas like rollover reading that you can do. And I'm very hot on the fact that we don't all have amazing equipment in our homes and in our preschools. What can we do with what we've got? So there's equipment, bits and pieces that you can use from around the home to enhance the learning. It's lots of fun.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time, Gill, and I am super excited about talking to you on a few more episodes to come.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it, Claire. Thanks for approaching me.
So that's the end of this episode of the Thriving Children podcast. Until next time, be kind to yourself.
Thanks for listening to the Thriving Children podcast. For even more goodness, visit thrivingchildren.com.au.